thank you so much for doing this. Really appreciate it.
It's a real pleasure.
Yeah. And finally, I get to thank you in the media for letting us do a version of Gordon's Gin, which is now unbelievably 42 years ago. So it's hardly recent. But I wanted to start by saying, first of all, obviously you're an incredibly famous person, but you're also in the brief number of times that I've met you, you come across as a very humble and generous sort too. And that's quite a rarity in the music industry, I have to say.
Well, thank you for that.
And that I often find that people who are concerned with ostensibly the commercial side of the business, i.e. nakedly commercial, as in writing for commercial purposes, seem to be nicer people for some reason. Maybe because they have to deal with assholes a lot. I don't know. But I've done a few adverts, nothing compared to you. But you have to be a special sort of person to deal with those kind of clients a lot of the time. But anyway, good. So let's start at your where you grew up, really, I suppose, in Forest Hills. Is that right?
Indeed, it was. I was born in Forest Hills, New York, but my actual birth was in a hospital called the Women's Hospital of Manhattan, which is still there. But with my parents, of course, we lived in Forest Hills, which was, I would sort of say, it's sort of like a North London environment, apartments, private houses, but lots of greenery, rather than a street or series of streets that were just all bricks and mortar, so to speak.
Right. And Forest Hills is obviously well known for tennis, correct?
It certainly is. And that's been my sport, my main sport, my whole life. And later on, when I was playing high school tennis at Forest Hills High, our practice and our matches were at the Forest Hills Tennis Club, which was where at that point what today would be the U.S. Open, which moved some years ago to Flushing Meadows, which is also on the island of in Queens.
But did that influence you? Did that environment influence you regarding tennis?
Well, it did, but I think the real influence to get me going, the fun of the game and the sport, was through my dad, who was a national standard player. So although he was an actor and a singer and a writer, tennis, literally up until about a month before he passed, we went through our lives together with that as a bonding sport.
Oh,
yeah. And so without him, I don't know what my interest in tennis would have become or not.
Yeah. And he was an actor, and he was famous for playing Sky Masterson, that's right, in Guys and Dolls?
He was the original Sky Masterson in the West End production, having been signed to do that role on the original Broadway production. But he was touring in another musical called Finian's Rainbow, which I actually had a small part in as well for a period. And he had an entrance that he had to make, and he slipped and landed on his back, and whatever the damage done was he needed surgery, and in those days it was 6 months on your back before he could even start rehabbing.
Yes.
Bottom line is he lost the Broadway production, but when about 5 years later it came to London, the producers remembered my dad and put him back in that role. It was the romantic lead of Sky Masterson.
Fantastic. I love that film and that play. I've seen it on the stage a couple of times, and yeah, it's a great piece of work. It really is. Yeah.
Really is.
And So good-looking guy, presumably then. Romantic lead.
Very, yeah, he was a handsome dude, and he had the, as any pop artist can get, a lot of fans following him around and all. And I've got pictures of him exactly like that, being surrounded by fans, wanting autographs and all that goes with it. So yeah, he was.
So this is interesting because did you ever want to be an actor?
No, well, I loved music and performance, but I liked what I went for was the creating, producing of whatever I've done in my career as an originator. But particularly in the early years, I was playing keyboards in bands. I was fortunate to start being commissioned to do commercials and TV themes, a few movie scores.
How did that? Yeah, sorry to interrupt. How did? Sure. I teach writing a commercial brief on a master's level, and I am really interested in I mean, my students would be very interested in finding out a little bit more how you got these opportunities. So can we dig a bit deeper into that? I mean, I know obviously because your dad was in the business and blah, 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 but I mean, really, you were an amazingly talented young man. I mean, you wrote a full musical, didn't you, when you were 23 years old for your father? Is that right?
Yeah, in fact, it was because of that musical that led me to being commissioned for the first TV advert that I'd ever done.
There you go.
The musical was based on Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities, and it ran at the Palace Theatre in London. And just coincidentally, Martyn, the subject was very similar to Les Mis. And Les Mis, years later, ran at the Palace Theatre. The truth of me writing the musical score and scoring the dance music was pure nepotism because my father was the producer, and he just believed in the little that I had composed, few records that were recorded and were released, and I kept saying to him as I got closer to move from California, where I was playing in these bands, and I had a songwriting partner separate from my dad. Excuse me. And I was coaching tennis. That's how I paid my way through college between the gigs and the coaching. And I kept saying to him, Dad, you could commission any top composer, particularly those with big credits, doing musicals, and you're wanting me to. And he didn't want to discuss it. He said, no, I want you to do it. He said, and I want to write the lyrics. So we became a partnership.
Oh, what a fantastic thing for a father and son to do together. You're very, very lucky. I mean, my son, his birthday's actually this week. He's going to be 23 years old. He's a composer. He writes in a more kind of orchestral vein, using samples and stuff. And he's self-taught. He writes more like epic stuff, that's his thing. And he's done loads of stuff for me, but unfortunately I don't have the wherewithal to offer him a West End musical. But I would love to. He's just as talented. But I can definitely verify that the bond that creates between yourself and your father must have been really strong. If you were working creatively together at that level, at that age, you must have been very grateful for that.
Oh, to this day. And between that and tennis, and we had other interests together. He was my best friend without a question.
Oh, well.
We were just extremely close, as you could expect. Perhaps in the same way you and your son relate to that. So there's no question. But it was nepotism. I didn't deserve by the standing that I had, if you can even call it standing. I was probably more sitting down, as a composer and an orchestrator. But yeah, it opened. It won for the leading man, Edward Woodward, the best performance in a musical. the show itself was like a runner-up to Hair. It wasn't the day of the Olivier's. It was when the Evening Standard Award was main theater award. Now it's the Olivier's. But actually, coming back to your question about how I got into commercials and other media music, one of the investors in Two Cities was a friend of my dad, and he invested, having heard the score, because we used to present to anybody that would listen, basically, with the potential of investing in the musical to get it on. And he asked me very unexpectedly, I should add, he was at that point in time one of the top directors of TV and cinema commercials in the UK. Wow. I'd place him in and around the way Ridley Scott broke through, who I did music for some commercials. And this is a man named Frank Strike, who passed away about 8 to 10 years ago, but we stayed in touch all the years. And the commission was for the Cheese Bureau. And
that sounds like an indie rock band now.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. And the advertising agency was J. Walter Thompson, which at the time was the largest agency in the world, I believe. I think it's now part of a larger group, but it was its own standalone ad agency. So this was when I say for the Cheese Bureau, the actual campaign was about as quirky as the name of the commissioning company, the Cheese Bureau, and all it was. And again, it's, I'm sure you've had experiences in your life and your career where you just had the rub of the green. Something just went your way, perhaps disproportionately to what you thought. And this was what happened with me, because the commercial started with just a lump of ordinary cheddar cheese. And the concept of the ad was the second you saw this lump of cheese, a voiceover would come on and say cheese louder. And then it burst into a theme, which at that point of time, this was around 1969. So I was literally just breaking through. And the ad broke into a theme that was very much in the sort of genre of Zorba the Greek. There was a theme from that movie starring Anthony Quinn that was just very lively. It's this sort of upbeat theme that you'd be throwing plates at in a Greek restaurant.
Zorba the Greek, right? Yeah.
Yeah, Zorba the Greek, exactly. And so that's what I wrote.
Yeah, sorry, I was thinking, I was 13 at the time. It does ring a bell. I'm pretty sure I saw that ad. Was it on TV in Britain, yeah?
Oh, yeah. It was for British TV.
Right.
And the whole idea was once this theme started, you'd start to see this lump of ordinary cheddar cheese turn into the most sophisticated dishes. The concept being, see what you can do with just an ordinary lump of cheddar cheese.
Yeah.
And then it come to the very end, and the voiceover would reappear, and it would just say again, say cheese louder. Everything in between those two small bits of voiceover, there was just music. So I got lucky, that rub of the green, where my first commercial was mostly built around a thematic piece with, most commercials, many commercials anyway, you have voiceover or other ingredients where the music doesn't breathe through in the same way.
Yeah, of course.
And it went on to win. At the time, there was an award ceremony every year, sort of like the Oscars of commercials. And it would be for the best director, the best commercial. And I won for the best music. So again, the rub of the green kept going because people were keen to know from the advertising world who wrote that piece of music. And it was also the fact that there was a very styled type of music that was used in advertising that had a similarity of sound. And I came through at a time when all my background in music was pretty wide because I was classically trained on piano. I started scoring music, and and using synthesizers, electronics from pretty much the time they were introduced here in the UK. So once that commercial became established, and then there was other commercials in that series under, say, Cheese or the Cheese Board, and it was a time when the sound of advertising was changing, and there were a few other writers. Manfred Mann was one, with Mike Hugg from his own band, which you may know. He was doing commercials, and so the whole style of writing music for commercials was changing. So I was, again, just at the right place at the right time, and it was like turning a tap on. I suddenly was getting calls from so many different advertising agencies and production companies, and some people thought of me as a more classical writer because of Two Cities, the musical, or thematic pieces because of the Cheese Board, and I had a little show reel, as they used to have, composers used to have, tape reel, and you'd send it into an advertising agency if they were interested in knowing what else you did. So I had some rock pieces and electronic pieces. So I was getting offers from so many different walks of life because somebody thought of me as more of a classical writer, somebody else more electronic, and so I was getting pieces of all the action, so to speak.
Interesting.
And it really tested me, because the demands of one's time, would have to turn your work around very quickly, and I was moving from one style to the other, working to brief, to scoring, to picture. So that was the Cheese Board.
How old were you at that point?
I would have been, well, it was when Two Cities opened that Frank, the director, asked me to write it. So I would have been 21, 22, something like that.
Jesus. So listen, all you students, if you watch this or listen to it, I don't want none of this, oh, well, sometime in the future, you got to catch up with Jess. And what are you looking at that? He did have a leg up, I have to say. But, as we always say when we're teaching, opportunity has to find you prepared. And you were definitely prepared.
Well, thanks for saying that. I think I was prepared enough. And I was still also, during that period, for about a year and a half, I went to Trinity College of Music, and I studied like advanced scoring or orchestration. I kept up with my piano, and one of the things that was most useful to me was conducting. I took an advanced conducting course, having done some conducting MD work in California, but it wasn't, the full gamut of being able to conduct any form of music and read a score. So, I kept testing myself. I wanted to learn more because I was good in some areas and I was limited in others. So anything that, I'm sure you go through this yourself in life with, oh, that's a challenge. I've got to see how I can meet the challenge.
Yeah. What's interesting to me, and hearing you talk in detail about this, is a lot of people would take the more formal route and do the orchestration, the conducting, and you did all that. But actually, what gave you the edge, I think, is because you were working with early synthesizers. So what I hear when I just, I was listening to your stuff again and refreshing my memory last night. What is clear is that you have a masterful command of spectral placing of different sounds within the stereo field or compositional field. It could be mono, actually. To be fair, it's not about space. It's about how the sounds occupy the spectral range, and I think you can learn a certain amount of that, and a certain amount of it relates to different instruments and ranges on a stave. But a lot I learnt. I'm self-taught, so I don't read or write music, but I learnt that from using synthesizers from the outset, because you could have any sound you wanted. You could have any pitch you wanted, however many harmonics you wanted. You can mix in noise with it. You could do whatever you want. If you're designing sounds from scratch, you can literally design sounds to fit in a certain space in the mix. And that's what I hear in your work, which is different to an orchestral arranger, a pure orchestral arranger. And from that point of view, following on from that, I've got a kind of what do they call it? A follow-on question, which is which synthesizers did you use from the earliest time of your composition?
The very first synth that I used was a big one, a Moog 3C, which had sort of different modules, three. And it was like an old telephone operator's plug-in, and and it was like a Mad Professor in a way, It
was a Moog modular, or a precursor of that.
Well, that was the name of the model.
Oh, right, okay.
But it came sort of divided into these three, and the second one was on top of the first, and the third was on top of the second. Yeah. And then you had all these cables that you would just interconnect depending upon where you were going with your music. The top one was actually what today we'd call an arpeggiator.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever worked with or seen a Moog 3C. No, it was groundbreaking. Well, it came out around 1969, and again, coming back to being in the right place at the right time. Robert Moog was the man who took electronics and put them into boxes. Yeah. And he came over to the UK during that period to demonstrate them. And if I'm remembering correctly, George Martyn and a couple of other major artists invested in one. And I did the same because I felt, it excited me as a musician, starting with that. Yeah. And it just gave a new way of expressing yourself musically. I like blending electronics with real instruments.
Completely.
You agree with that, do you?
To me, that's where the magic is. That's where the magic source happens. In that, where you can't tell whether it's real or electronic, and it doesn't matter. But it's like something you never heard before. That gives me a thrill even talking about it.
Well, I completely agree, and that was what moved me. They were expensive, so if you were going to invest in one, you really wanted to make use of it. But this is a true story, Martyn. I was just going to add, if I may, a true story, because Robert Moog came over, and he was just up on this giant pedestal by all the musicians that were there to meet him, to see how he demonstrated it was the 3C at the time. And he was very kind and agreed to help set up I was living in London at the time, and I had a music room. It wasn't particularly big, but big enough to get the Moog in and a couple of other, I had an 8-track Scully tape recorder, and other boxes of things. And I was so excited that he was coming over to install what would become my 3C. And I had a place set up in my studio where it was going to be housed, and the studio was sort of built around the Moog 3C. Everything else was there and interconnecting with it and the tape recorder. And I'm watching him, and he goes round to the back, and I must have turned away or something for 2 seconds. I turned back, and I don't see him. And then I realize I'm hearing something on the floor, and I look under, and there he is on the floor on his knees, looking at a UK plug. And he didn't know what the green there was like three cables, if I'm remembering correctly.
That's right. Green, black, and red, was it? Something like that.
Yeah, but the green was, I think, for the earthing.
Yeah.
And he didn't know what it was all about. And so I get down on my knees and I explain and help him, and the rest was just fine. But I just have this memory of this great man struggling to connect three wires into a UK plug.
We have all been there, definitely. My goodness. And so this is great stuff, I have to say. I have to tell you that so when did you write the Gordon's Gin commercial? Can you remember?
Yeah, it was very soon after that cheese ad. Not cheesy ad, just a cheese ad. So that would have been about 1969.
Christ, that early.
Yeah. And it used but I was scoring it to picture, and it started off with a close-up of a glass of Gordon's gin and tonic or whatever the mix was with, and ice cubes in it. And what the film director was trying to show was like a world away from our world.
Yeah.
And it was a beautiful looking commercial.
Oh, it was gorgeous. I remember seeing it on the cinema, yeah.
Yes, it was. And it was the first advertisement mixed in quad.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It was a stereo mix because it was cinema, but then because it was running and was doing well, I was asked to mix it in quad, which I love doing. But that first section, and I don't remember if it was like a third or a half of the total 60-second commercial, was where it was more electronic and moody.
Yeah.
And then it turned into a theme, which I know you know well enough. Your interpretation on your travelogue album with Human Ridley. And I then started introducing, there was like a driving rhythm, a string quartet, and a band with the electronics from the Moog 3C, but it just became its own thing.
Oh, the way that is, that was a thrilling sound in the cinema. And just so you know, just before lockdown, which was March last year, we were due to play Heaven 17 Presents, Travelogue and Reproduction. We're going to do both albums on one night. We wanted to get Phil, the singer of the Human League, in to do it, but he wouldn't do it. So we thought we'd do a tribute to the albums, because I wrote them anyways then. So that's how we got around it. But I've been working on a new arrangement for the for Gordon's Gin, which I haven't done, obviously, for 40 years. So we're going to perform that live. We were going to perform that live, and we will later this year if everything works out well. So when that happens, I'll give you a shout, and
please do.
Great if you could come down. I think you'd really enjoy it.
I would love to. I would love to.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, moving on. So I have to tell you that David Essex's "Rock On" was one of my earliest singles, and it's something I actually played the grooves off. I played it so much, and I think the thing that attracted me at that time, of course, I wasn't a musician at that time. I was just a fan. Of the sound of the record and the interesting way that delays were used. And I look back on it now and I think it reminds me of kind of almost like reggae dub plate effects. So I'm really curious to know, firstly, what your role was in creating that production, and secondly, what the theory was behind the sound of the record, because it still sounds unique to this day. That record.
Well, thank you for saying that. It's a record I'm very proud of. David was signed to my label during that period for about 5 years, and I toured with him as his MD, and I do the arrangements for the live bands and all that. But Rock On was the very first record we recorded, and there was a B-side, which was more of a straight pop ballad. But Rock On was demoed to me by David in Advision Studios in London, because I met David when he was playing Jesus in London. in Godspell, and it just happened that I was going out with a girl at the time who she was the understudy for all the girls in the show, and often we'd all go out for a meal afterwards or any combination like that. And David was quite happy to do sessions for me, which he did. And it was after one particular session that we were talking about just records in his own recording career. And he had been with a label that had 3 or 4 records out that, for whatever the reasons were, they didn't quite work. They were very good, but they commercially weren't clicking. And he said he was looking to move on, and asked if I was interested in maybe working with him in some capacity. And so the bottom line is, it came out that he signed to my label, and I put up the money for Rock On and this other song called On and On. And he demoed it by going, this was at Advision in London, and he went into the studio where we had been just recording, and the microphone was still set up, and there was a piano that was on the session, so the miking was still on for that. So our engineer said, yeah, just David, go out and maybe sit by the piano and sing the song, play it if you can.
Yeah.
And he said, great. So he went into the studio, and I thought that's exactly what he was going to do. He'd sit by the piano and play it and demo whatever this song Rock On was going to contain. Instead, right next to the piano was a trash bin, and he went over, picked up the trash bin, and actually turned over and emptied the bin of the contents on the floor, and then moved over to this other mic where he was singing, and sat down and used the trash can as sort of like a conga.
Right.
And he was playing a groove, and he was actually a very good drummer. Right. So having a good groove and a rhythm, something that he did quite easily. And I'm hearing this song now. And of course, there's no other accompaniment. It's just David singing and keeping time to the feel of the song. And I think that helped me, because what eventually, when we came to record the song properly, I chose to not have any instrument that played a chord. So there's no keyboards, there's no guitars. It's built around a bass guitar played by Herbie Flowers, who tracked his part that gave an extra wobble to his lick. And then a percussionist and a drummer who was not playing the full kit. It was all about the spaces, the way that I heard it. And I had this, again, one of these vivid memories of, it was a typical band call. Okay, it was a 10 o'clock start, and I only had the 3 musicians. David was there, and he was going to sing on a guide track, and me sort of leading the band in, sort of conducting, and no clicks or anything like that, just to get them going. But Herbie, 2 Barrys, both the late Barry Morgan and Barry D'Souza, they're in their places, and suddenly I see them looking around, and I think it was Herbie who said, Jeff, when's the rest of the band coming? And I said, and it dawned upon me. I said, hold on, guys, you are the band. This is it. And I said, let me explain. I said, I don't want to hear full chords or anything, because what I'm hearing is spaces, and it's filling the space with just your instruments. I will layer things on at another time, which will be singular, strings and brass, but no guitars, no keyboard. And that's how the track got built up. There's one opening bit that I actually did. I can't say I played anything, but I asked for my engineer on the day to set up 2 microphones sort of apart, left and right. Mm-hmm. So it's the last thing you hear before David starts singing, and it's a sound that was just...
Oh, yeah.
And it went from, I guess, left to right and had a little repeat echo on it. But that was it.
I love that the simplicity and bravery and elegance of the track. But you see what I was saying about the some of those kind of 1960s 70s early dub tracks from Jamaica, and where everything drops out and all you're left with is kind of bass rhythm, bass and maybe congas but a lot of it has got repeats on. A lot of it has got generating repeats and stuff. And also, of course, the vocal treatment on that track is very, that's like a slapback, isn't it? It's like 90 milliseconds or 60 seconds. Yeah, something.
Spot on. No, well done.
Right.
That's actually, it was, I can tell you why the vocals wound up with the music in that sort of feel is because there's a reference in David's lyrics to the actor Jimmy Dean, and James, and his lyric. That's it. So to me, it was something that took us back to a particular period when James Dean was still alive, and I was fortunate to have a fantastic engineer who was into sound and understood what I was trying to, I guess, sort of clumsily explain what I was hearing, but he took it to a sound that is what the final record sounded like.
Interesting. And so, of course, David Essex went on to be a massive star and a film star as well. And he did the #1 record, I'm Going to Make You a Star, and all that stuff. Was that on your label? No, that was after he left, was it?
Yeah, we had a really great run. We're still good mates to this day. And we had, I think, coming back to fun, doing something that you're enjoying.
Yeah.
And if you're in a collaboration with someone, if you can rub that feeling off back and forth, it just happens. Something grows beyond. Here's the notes, play them. It isn't that. I think you have to build on the relationship, people that you're working with. And David, when you talk about being sort of brave to try to do a record like Rock On, I have to say that David was the brave one, because he was hearing this record and I could see whirling around in his head, what am I hearing? The basic backing track didn't sound like anything that he was expecting. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Cool.
So he let me run with it.
And so before we leave the world of ads, I just want to say that according to your Wikipedia, you wrote 3,000 of them, which is quite impressive. And another favourite of mine was Fry's Turkish Delight. You did that one, right?
Martyn, I get asked about that whenever I've done, say, an interview, and commercials are part of the conversation. That one always seems to get picked up, and I'd love to claim that I wrote it, but I didn't.
Oh, what a pity.
I did an arrangement and production for a campaign that had already established the tune, and I actually don't know who wrote it.
All right. It's just a very evocative thing when you're young. It just embodied a whole kind of world of glamour and everything. Anyway, we have to move on to War of the Worlds, which obviously is your most famous and most, what can I say? It's kind of dominated your life to a certain extent, hasn't it? I mean, it's been so successful over such a long period that you, I wonder if sometimes you might go, I wish people would just move on. but it keeps coming back, and it's because it's a genius piece of work. So please tell us about the genesis of that idea.
Well, it was during the period I was doing all this other range of work, commercials, media work, touring with David, and other projects, that it was my dad who knew how much I was enjoying and appreciating the value that my career had established itself, working with some wonderful artists and working for filmmakers and TV shows. But he kept coming back to me, nagging me. He said, when we did Two Cities all those years ago, you always said you hoped you'd do at least one or maybe two more grand works that you'd fell in love with as a composer, and then, of course, as an arranger, producer. He said, and you haven't really mentioned that. I haven't seen you pursue that side of your career. Don't you think you should? And I think it was probably just to get him off my back. I said, okay, let's start reading some books, which we did. And it wasn't science fiction as a genre. That was the only thing we were reading. It was anything that just was like going to be a potentially great story to interpret through music.
Yeah.
And it happened to be on literally the night before going out on one of the tours I was doing with David, that my dad came over just to wish me luck for the tour. And he said, by the way, here's another book for you to consider. It's H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds, which I knew the name of, but I really didn't know the real story, because the only version that I was aware of was a sort of a 1953 movie.
The movie. It's a movie, actually.
Yeah, but it was set in contemporary America.
Yeah.
And that's what I thought I'd read when I read H.G.'s book. It's not. It's a very dark Victorian tale. And the more I discovered about H.G. Wells, he was actually writing this story to take a pop at the expanding British Empire.
Yeah.
As you could say, it was invading, call it what you like, but it was an empire for a reason, and that's because of the territory that they controlled and expanded on.
That's right.
And the Martians were as aliens, were the invading force. Yeah. And so the story took on
allegorical. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. Perfect word to describe them. And he, I felt, just had a lot to say. And what has kept me with it for so many years was that I actually think it's always been a story of hope, faith, and love. That it's all more on a positive side, even though it's a epic story of invasion that starts with a first cylinder, with Martians and machines that they had to build once they landed in England. They landed in Surrey on a common called Horsell Common, and it contains nothing but real places and fantastic descriptions of the life as Victorian England was. So those were all the ingredients that I fell in love with. But his imagination, not just The War of the Worlds, but other things that he wrote, was quite fantastic. The Martians came with machines that were beyond anything that humanity could defend themselves against. The Martians themselves were all brain, intelligence, and they had weaponry that, again, was just literally out of this world. It was a collection of ingredients that the best of the British armies and defense mechanisms couldn't compete with.
Yeah.
So it did have amazing adventure, but that's the background to how I fell in love with the story. And I learned very quickly, as did my dad, that it was still very much in copyright. H.G. died in 1946, and he left, I think, all of the rights to his works to his son, Frank. He also had a brother named Frank, which he actually dedicated the story to, because the background to how he came to write the story was he and his brother Frank were walking around Woking one day, and Frank said to H.G., I wonder what would happen if from out of the skies, an alien force landed. What would we do? How could we survive? And that sparked H.G. to write The War of the Worlds.
That's very interesting.
Yeah. And Frank, his son Frank, inherited The War of the Worlds, and about 3 months after reading the book and falling in love with it, and I took it on tour with me, because there was no computer games, there was no email, nothing of the sort of the world we live in today. So reading was something one could do quite easily, and I fell in love with it after one read. having read a lot of different books from different genres, and some of them were brilliant books, but they just didn't get to me in my soul, I guess. But The War of the Worlds did. It took us about 3 months to locate Frank Wells. We went through a lawyer based in Washington who had a specialty in tracing where the rights to copywritten works were. Unlike today, of course, go onto Google and you'll find all that information in a matter of seconds, and you'll know who to go to.
Yeah.
So we wound up at Frank Wells's agent's offices, a husband and wife team, and Frank Wells, and meeting Frank and presenting what the idea that was in our minds and my mind as a composer, which was to interpret his dad's story, but keeping it exactly as he wrote it. So it's a dark Victorian tale. Don't want to modernize it. I don't want to change the story. And that impressed him, along with probably the fact that there was a father and son team, and he was close to his dad.
Right.
So that left a sort of an indelible mark, and very quickly he agreed to sell us all the available rights.
Wow.
To The War of the Worlds, which was everything but the feature film rights and the book publishing rights, which of course had been published long ago. Wow. It wasn't even written as a book. I don't know if you knew this, and I didn't know it at the time, but it was a story that Pearson's magazine, and in America it was Cosmopolitan, but I think it was every month they'd publish a new edition, and it was an episodic adventure that H.G. wrote, so that like a cliffhanger. So he'd write a chapter, they'd publish it, and because it became very popular, the story would just continue on until it got to the very end.
Amazing.
And then it was put together, so to speak, glued together. It became the novel that it became, and that took off internationally.
Interesting. And just to let you know, I live in Primrose Hill, where the end of the story is, right?
Yes, indeed.
And so I often think about, particularly after I saw the stage show, because I'd never seen the stage show before I came to meet you and see
Yes,
it.
Remember that. Yeah, of course.
And I was so blown away. I mean, I can't believe I missed it in the first instance, because I'm a big science fiction fan. And, the staging of that show is something else. I mean, the war machine, whatever, the giant Martian machine.
The Martian fighting machine.
Like Martian fighting machine is...
You got to get your Martian all in order there, Mark.
That is,
or I'll start calling it the Martyn fighting machine.
Well, Martyn means warrior of Mars, apparently.
Is that so?
Yeah. So that must have been a very expensive and complex thing to construct at that time.
It was when we started touring in 2006, and it's only gotten bigger and more adventurous from a physical presentation. And that's part of the fun. That's largely why I've stayed with it, because there's always something new you can introduce. As you know, technology in our field changes so rapidly that new ideas come just by the fact that there are things that you can try that maybe just 2-3 years earlier didn't exist.
Exactly.
So I'm always challenging, and I've written a new song that appeared in 2014. In 2016, we did a West End run at the Dominion, which was supposed to be season, and it got extended by a month because it was really doing well. And I wrote a new song for that, which was only written for the West End production. So even myself, from a composer's point of view, it would be so easy to just take it out of the box every time we've toured and just do it and make more money, whereas I don't do that, and I make little money because I keep chucking money into
production, right?
Yeah, but I think in truth, we've had so many fans come back time and time again and expand with new ones, because I don't just take it out of the box. So if somebody comes back, they'll notice something different, they'll hear something different, and I hope that keeps them pleased and that it's a great night's entertainment.
Yeah. At this point, I have to give a shout out to our mutual friend Simon Lowery for introducing us. He'll be thrilled with that. I mean, he never stopped going on about what a great guy you were, and I'm going, well, I know he's a great composer, obviously, but you really are a great guy, so I really appreciate all your candid opening up about how all this stuff is created. Is just fascinates me. And I'm sure, as I say, I'm going to show this this Zoom call to my students, and hopefully they will learn quite a lot from it, because a large part of working to commercial brief is about being not just talented, but also kind of amenable to ideas and being able to interpret the client's ideas. And so I just want to have a quick word about that, actually, before we go on to a couple of other things. When you're given a brief, I can speak from a certain amount of experience, but you are like you are at the top of the Premier League compared to me in League Two. When you're given a brief, and they are not entirely sure what they want, which is often the case, but they have like a product they want to sell, obviously. Do you go away and do a couple of approaches, or do you have an instantaneous reaction to it and go, I think I know what we need to do? Or do you give them what I do, which is generally I do a couple of sketches and give them a kind of magician's choice? And then you have to try and make them feel like they've come up with the idea. How do you approach it?
I think what you've described with your experiences isn't very different at all, but I have to go back to that cheese commercial in an era when there weren't, computers, are certainly not the way technology has moved. Often I would be given, and maybe you have, like a storyboard, and it's got timings on it. It's got good enough drawings to represent each key moment in the commercial, very much like scoring a movie or other visual projects. And I would do demos, 2 or 3, to give at least the commissioning person or company. Sometimes in my experiences, there's several people you're presenting to. Usually a director will be influencing his vision to get across to the composer. And ultimately, you hope that you get one of your demos selected for going to master. I mean, today, if I didn't have that background on, you'd see, I'm just sitting in my control room of my studio. So like so many people who work now from their own home studios, I've got a bigger studio room, that the biggest lineup we've ever had. Something like, I think we had a 32-piece choir and then a band of about 16. But in today's world, it's so often, an instrument at a time, and you build it up differently. On the big scores, I would go to a commercial studio, but ultimately it's getting a piece of music that's working for the product. And today, so much has changed in the way creatively I think music is being used. It's almost like a counterpoint rather than going with the visuals.
Yeah.
The visuals are so quirky and imaginative, and like with music, the technology has changed. So from a computer, you can pretty much visualize almost anything. And when you need, real scenes set up in the outdoors, indoors, actors, whatever, it all gets merged into this one visual. And then I'm scoring to it, whether it's a piece of music or they're singing. So I look back over what's 40, whatever 1968 to 2021 is, that's 40 some odd years. The way music has been chosen has changed dramatically. And I don't know if you have, and it's only in like recent years that it's gotten to me to be, I guess, maybe just brave enough to work with, say, a drummer, and he's based, or she's based in, because I can think of a lady drummer in Australia. It will do a session for you on the other side of the world, or a singer who's got something to sing, but we're just doing it electronically. So even that in the extreme is so different from the only way that you could record in that period of time through the 70s, maybe into the early 80s, somewhere when technology became so adventurous and diverse that you had other ways of working.
Yeah. Have you is there anything that you've not done that you'd really like to do? Because you've done so much stuff.
I have touched probably on most media, and when I say media, I mean anything that's a creative production, but I've never written a ballet, even though some of my music, particularly from the War of the Worlds, has been performed as a ballet. But and I got very close with a choreographer, and unfortunately for me, I kept getting more tours and things coming in. It was going to be, and we got to the stage where I was already working on outlines. It was conceived as like you'd say, a remix where you have two artists and it's so-and-so versus so-and-so. This ballet was going to be Matisse versus Picasso. And it was their two lives as both geniuses of art, but their styles were so different. And I began scoring, and the ideas was that it would flip from one to the other. And they were rivals, not just in art, but in love. It is a fantastic story. And I had to put it down and then, not had to, but I had another fantastic opportunity to tour the War of the Worlds. And I conduct live on stage, which you may recall having come to see it. And that's, I think, my greatest experience from an energy point of view, is conducting your own work. I've spent a career, of course, conducting other people's works, being an MD for an artist, which it's his or her songs. But when you're conducting your own work of 2.5 hours now, I feel like a hovercraft. I'm just slightly off the ground for 2.5 hours, then the air goes out. I go,
You should but seriously, you should consider doing a proms or something. For instance, Hans Zimmer has done one of his own work and toured that around, just like snippets of his work from different periods, and that was really successful. I went to see that. Ennio Morricone, of course, towards the end of his life, toured the world with this. I mean, he's the greatest of all time as far as I'm concerned. Interestingly enough, regarding ballet, I did 3 pieces with the Royal Ballet, and
what?
Yeah, with a
what were they? Right, and what were the subjects?
One was called Knots. I don't know if you may remember, there was a book in the 70s called Knots by R.D. Lang.
Yes.
Yeah. And it was based around that book, which is like it was a very kind of, it was one of the hip books that you read at the time. It was relating, as you know, Bram explained it for the audience, it was relating human relationships in kind of mathematical form to each other. And I really thought that was excellent. Anyway, we created together with my friend Vanessa Fenton, who was like first artist and choreographer at the Royal Ballet, we created a piece which was a 5-part suite for two dancers, which was the travails of a troubled relationship, basically. So it was quite dark. I mean, some of it was quite dark, and we incorporated some of the text into the music as well, which was really interesting. So that was called Knots. And then I did another piece which was about Petrushka, the famous Prokofiev. Was it Prokofiev? One of the big early 20th century Russian composers. It was based around a story that they originally did as a ballet, but we wrote a whole new suite of music in the middle of it, and that was performed on the main stage. And then there was another thing that I did, which I can't remember now, but that working with ballet dancers of that level and choreographers of that level, I think when I'm laying on my deathbed will be probably the most exciting and most fulfilling thing I've ever done, because I spent 3 months going to rehearsals every day. It was a true iterative process. So you'd write a little piece of music. It's like knitting a jumper, right? You'd write a little piece of music. They would do a bit of choreography to it, run some experiments. Then the choreographer would say, right, I would like to take the choreography to this. I would like the movements and the blocking of it to go in this direction. Could you write me a piece of music in this tempo? So I'd do that. I'd bring that back. That would spark another idea. And so it was a true collaboration. And the end product was just amazing. You know, it was like you can't imagine it happening in any other way. So I would say, from your point of view, you need to do some more ballet, mate. Definitely. It's the most incredibly... I mean, I like working to picture as well, but there's something about working with movements of the human body which is so completely thrilling and inspiring for them as well as you know?
I agree with you. It's interesting, say, as two musicians here, and you're telling me about your ballet projects and Knots, which is the one I do know, and what influenced you, obviously, that must have influenced you to want to create this ballet. And would be coming from, maybe I'm being literal, but starting with a story that I can work from and understand, and then open it up to whatever it's needed to be. So two guys, both in the same field, and our influences or how we react to something is a bit different.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really interesting.
It makes the beauty of art, I think.
Completely. Okay, we're getting towards the end of this now. So I just want to say, you've always been a person who's looked forward, and you know, you're not kind of resting on your laurels. You are. You seem to. You've recently done the immersive version of War of the Worlds, correct?
And I'm in the studio that I'm sitting in that you can't see. We are working toward reopening it because, like so many other areas of entertainment and restaurants and all of that, we've been closed since March, when the first lockdown happened, and it has not reopened. So in a way, it's not what we wanted, but it's given us a period of time to step back and review it and grow it. It turned out to be unexpectedly a success that none of us who were involved in it imagined it was going to be. It was for a run that was going to be 3 months, and then maybe move on to another venue somewhere else. But it's ran in the city. It's about a 22,000 square feet venue on 2 floors, and it's designed around every sort of, from virtual reality, every sort of technology, live performance, and all built to my score of the War of the Worlds. But now it's reopening, pandemic aside, on May the 1st.
Right.
And it's about to be announced. And I've been working on it, and working, as soon as we're done, I'll go back to working further with my studio team. There's a large team in London at the venue because it's had to be certified as COVID compliant.
Yeah.
So it is still there. It won. It's called a Thea Award, which is the sort of Oscars of the interactive world. And there's so many different ways that you can interpret what interactive, immersive
Yeah.
is. It's a very common couple of words these days, but it's also was just before we had to close it down. We were about to announce it individually, not in place of, but it's going to have a venue in Birmingham and in Berlin. And so each time we would move to another city, we would go back to it creatively and keep growing it. So yes, that's something that's still very much there, and working on it as soon as we finish here. I have a cup of tea. I have a cup of tea, though.
Yeah, a cup of tea. You need a cup of tea. Funny enough, I'm working on with an immersive theatre company in Venice, because I used to live in Venice for 30 years, and I'm moving back there this year. They like to Venice, yeah, and they moved to Venice themselves. They're British. They moved there 18 months ago, and of course they've been buggered up by the pandemic. But they were invited by the city council to create an immersive theatre experience in a giant palazzo on the Grand Canal, 28 rooms, 28 actors, 28 rooms, all on a giant timeline, like a Gantt chart, right? And all that stuff, with I think it's like 50 guests per performance. The guests are not directed at all. You can freely visit anywhere in the entire place. If you visited the experience 1,000 times, it'd be different every time, because there's no way you can be in all places simultaneously. And I think that's really exciting. And I'm going to be doing some 3-dimensional sound with them. I don't know if you know, but I've got a 3D sound soundscaping company. I've been doing that for 20 years now, called Illustrious. Myself and Vince Clark from Eurasia.
Sure.
And we've done some enormous installations, public art installations, and this is, anyway, one of the things we're going to be doing.
Wow.
Yeah. I'd like to, in fact, at some point, not now, but at some point in the near future, I'm going to send you some details about all that. So I think it's something you'd be interested in.
I'd love to. I mean, it's, that term immersive, whatever term you want to apply to it, it can be interpreted so broadly. And what you've described is nothing like our show. Yet they probably live in the same world of creative people that come together to make whatever that project happens to be.
Exactly. And we use ambisonics, which you're probably familiar with.
Yes.
And so I've been writing and composing in 3 dimensions for the last 20 years. And I'd love to play some stuff at some point. Anyway, that's a different thing. Okay, I always ask every guest, it seems quite trivial, this, but it's quite fun. Finally, what your some favorite things of yours. So I'd like to know what your favorite synth is. I think you've already answered that. Is it going to be the M3?
I think it is the Moog 3C, even though I've worked with, my studio is just piled high with different ones, maybe because of the emotion that I attach.
Yeah.
Moog 3C was my first one. It's so bad from a technical point of view compared to what we would both be so familiar with. But yeah, I'll stick with the Moog 3C.
Excellent. And your favorite book? I think I might know what this one knows. Maybe not.
Well, it has become the War of the Worlds for all the reasons we chatted about earlier. But Cannery Row by John Steinbeck is a favorite of mine.
Yeah.
Mice and Men also by him.
Great.
So there's a couple more.
Excellent. Favorite film?
Well,
one of them.
Yeah, well, I would probably pick a movie that starred Marlon Brando as, I think it was his breakthrough movie. It was a very tough story built around the the men who worked on the docks in New York, and he was brilliant in it. And
on the waterfront, right?
On the waterfront. Sorry, I just realized I didn't say the name of the book or the movie. And the movie. So
the great movie. Yeah.
Thank you for being a good feed.
I'm a stooge. That's all. And your favorite composer or artist, or whichever.
Yeah, that's I don't know how you feel if you do have one, but I never been able to give a simple answer on that, because there's so many different styles of writing and soundscapes, and whether they're pieces of music or pieces written for something. I conducted as a final exam before I moved back to England to work on Two Cities. I conducted the first movement of Stravinsky's Rite of Spring.
Oh my God, I love it.
Is a magnificent piece of music.
Yeah,
it is. It starts with a bassoon at its highest range, playing this most beautiful melody, which was already sort of a groundbreaking concept, because a bassoon would be down below. Yeah. In fact, in the War of the Worlds, I have a group of instruments, because other than the strings and the band work, of which a lot of them were computers or synths, but I had sounds that would come to be like a bassoon or other woodwind instruments, but done electronically, and I gave them a group name of oons.
Yeah.
So there's, if you were to see my original handwritten scores, or even electronically now, I have a bass oon, bassoon, and so forth and so on.
The oons, that's very good. That's very good. And finally, I would ask you what your favorite visual artist is.
When you say a visual artist,
well, I mean a painter or a sculptor or or an installation artist, whatever.
Well, there have been so many newer ways of interpreting art, again, because technology, or the way our minds have been opened up to, the way art is created. But I think I probably would stick to Picasso and Matisse. Quite different in their expression of art. Matisse being beautiful and delicate, and Picasso stark, and certainly in his main area of how he's known. And they always move me whenever I've had a look. When I was working on this ballet, I was looking at and reading books about them. So maybe that's why they come to mind to give you an answer to your.
Fantastic. And just before we go, I actually did a massive installation at the National Portrait Gallery to celebrate the anniversary of Picasso's birth. And I had lots of different rooms with three-dimensional sound in them and different artists performing. We had ballet, we had singers, we had dancers, we had DJs, we had... it was a late night thing, and we had 5,000 people turn up. We had to lock the doors in the end. It was so popular. And it was called Everything You Can Imagine Is Real, which is one of his quotes, which is such a beautiful thing, isn't it?
Yeah. What a fantastic project for you to work on.
Oh, it was amazing. I earned no money out of it, of course, but I was so thrilled. And one thing that I found out during that research is Picasso took 3 years off from painting completely to become a poet and a librettist. Yeah, and a librettist. And his so what I actually got, I got a famous comedian who's a friend of mine called John Shuttleworth, who you may have heard of, but anyway, who I got him to read some of this amazing poetry, surrealist poetry, which was completely bonkers. I mean, it was out there, beyond out there, and having a comedian reading it was even weirder. So we projected that like 40 foot high on the entrance hall foyer. I'd love to do something like that again. I spend quite a lot of time curating big scale projects with multiple artists, and maybe that's something we could collaborate on in the future. That'd be fun.
Sounds really interesting.
Yeah.
I know a lot about your career. I didn't know that part of it, though. That's amazing.
I can bore you to death. When we eventually when we eventually have the ability to meet in either a pub or a restaurant, we should have a proper talk.
Okay, that sounds great.
What an absolute pleasure this has been. In fact, I'm loving it so much. I'm wondering whether we should make this we should split it in the middle and make it 2 parts, because it's gone on quite a long time and there's a lot of meat on this particular bone.
Yeah, that sounds great to me. Just let me know.
Cool, man. Thanks so much. Love you, Jeff. I'll see you really soon.
Thank you, Bart, and happy birthday to your son.
Oh, thank you. Cheers. Bye.
All the best.
Bye.